All right, everybody, today's short video is about the parts of the heart. Now, we are going to start right here, where blood is coming into the heart from the rest of the body. Now, this blood is shown in a bluish color because it is deoxygenated blood, and deoxygenated blood is just a little less red than oxygenated blood. However, there's a real common misconception out there that the blood in your veins is blue and blah, 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 blah. That's not true. The blood in your veins is a little less red than the blood that is oxygenated in your arteries, okay? Most of your arteries. There's one artery that is an exception, and we'll talk about that today. So we're going to start right here where all of this blood coming into the right side of the heart is deoxygenated. Okay, so we're going to have blood coming in from two different blood vessels. You can see there's two different stars there. These blood vessels are called the vena cava. For an advanced level of understanding, the superior vena cava is the top one that is bringing back blood from the upper part of the body, and the inferior vena cava is the bottom one that is bringing blood back from the lower part of the body. And by lower part, we really just mean below the heart. All right. So this blood is going to come into this cavity right here. This cavity is called the right atrium. It's called chamber. And this is where the deoxygenated blood collects. Just below the right atrium is the right ventricle. Now, the right atrium doesn't have very thick walls. They're pretty thin, actually. And there's a valve in here in between the two. The right ventricle also doesn't have very, well, it actually, ventricles have thicker walls. I shouldn't say doesn't. Ventricles have thicker walls in them. That's going to be important when we get to the left side. Okay, so we have the right atrium and we have the right ventricle. Now, in between the atrium and ventricle is a one-way valve. It is a one-way valve. And this particular, let me get a different color here. Get the New York Times notification. All right. This particular one-way valve is called the tricuspid valve. If you can identify that as a valve, you are proficient. If you can remember tricuspid valve, you would be advanced. If this ensures that when blood passes from the right atrium down to the right ventricle, when the right ventricle then pumps, that valve closes so that blood can only go out this way here. There is also a valve right here in between the right ventricle and the blood vessel that goes out of it. And this is called the semilunar valve. Okay. Now, then this tube here is going to branch off into two different directions. And that's because it's going to go to the right and left lung. This is the pulmonary artery. Remember that arteries carry blood away from the heart. So let's go to blue here. This is the pulmonary artery. This blood is deoxygenated, which makes it the only artery that carries blood that is deoxygenated. Okay, so this is going to go over to the lung, and do you remember what we call this circulation wing that travels over to the lungs? This is called pulmonary circulation. And then the left side of the heart is going to almost exactly mirror this right side of the heart. So we are going to have a tube that comes out of the left side, and we are going to have two blood vessels that come into the left side. All right, so I'm going to draw these walls with this valve here. Now the left side of the heart needs to have a thicker wall than the right side of the heart. We're going to have another valve right here. And the reason why is because this blood is going to go out to the rest of the entire body. And because it's going to go out to the rest of the entire body, it needs to be nice and thick and muscular so that it can pump it as far as possible. So this is the left atrium. This is the left ventricle. This valve right here is not a tricuspid, but a bicuspid valve. It only has two little flaps on it. Once again, it's a one-way valve, so it blocks the blood from going backwards. And this is also called a semilunar valve right here. Now, this blood vessel is going to loop back around the back of the heart. And this blood vessel is the aorta. The aorta branches off and goes in lots of different ways. And for example, there's the whole systemic circulation. And remember that systemic circulation is all of the blood that goes out to all of the different systems of the body. But there's also a cardiac circulation that supplies a little bit of blood to the actual muscles of the heart themselves, because these muscles need, oxygen and nutrients and things like that. So what we just drew then is this blood vessel right here. That's the aorta. It leads out to the rest of the body. Just realized that I didn't label the blood vessels that are coming into the left side of the heart. These are the only veins that carry oxygenated blood. These are the pulmonary veins. So for our last little bit of notes, let's talk about the muscles that make up the wall of the heart. These are muscles that are very different from the muscles that we've talked about in class so far. You have skeletal muscles. And these are your biceps and your gluteus and your triceps and your pectorals and all that kind of stuff. And those help to move your bones around. Your heart is not made of skeletal muscles. There are smooth muscles. Those are those circular and longitudinal muscles that surround all of your digestive system. And your heart is not made of these. Your heart is made of a kind of a muscle cell called a cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle, cardiac referring to the heart, cardiac muscles are very different from skeletal and smooth muscles. First of all, they can contract without stimulation. That means they don't have to be told by the central nervous system. That's the central nervous system. They don't have to be told by your brain to beat. They can just beat on their own. You might notice that these cardiac muscle cells have branches in them. Like right here, these muscle cells branch off. They're not just these long, thin things, but these are branched to allow the signal to move quicker. So these are branched to allow the signal that tells your heart to beat to move quicker. Now we have a name, and we talked about this when we talked about the nervous system, but it's important to know this word. When a signal travels from cell to cell to cell to cell, the word that describes that is propagate. So that allows the signal to propagate quicker by being branched. These cells are not fused together. These cells are instead connected by this little thing here called an intercalated disc. We'll talk about that intercalated disc in a second. This intercalated disc is what connects the different cells together. So they're not like fused or attached together by the membrane, but instead they have these discs. Finally, because these cells have to do a lot of work, these cells have lots of mitochondria. Because remember that mitochondria provide ATP, and you need ATP to do work in the cell, and that includes beating. Okay. So, let's talk about how the heart beats really quickly, and this will be the last little bit of our notes. So how the heart beats is first, the right atrium and the left atrium will contract, and contract means that they shorten. So this squeezes the blood down into the right ventricle and the left ventricle, and they do this at just about the same exact time. That'll be tomorrow's notes for how this heartbeat happens. And then second, and this is a contract right here, the right atrium and the left atrium then relax, which closes the valves. It causes a little bit of back pressure, so those valves close in between the right atrium and the right ventricle. So those are our tricuspid and bicuspid valves, those close. This gives you the first sound in your heartbeat. When you hear your heartbeat, you hear like lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. So those valves close, and when those valves close, that's actually the first sound of the heartbeat. Then the third thing that happens is the right ventricle and the and the left ventricle contract. So all of those cardiac muscles shorten and squeeze the blood out. Remember that the bicuspid and tricuspid valves are closed at this point. They can't go back. The blood cannot go backwards. If you do, you have a heart murmur. And so now the blood goes out to the pulmonary arteries, or in the case of the left ventricle, it goes out to the aorta. And then the right ventricle and the left ventricle will then relax. That causes the semilunar valves to close, and that's where you get the second heart sound, or dub. All right, that's it for today.